We're less than a year out from the US presidential election. As things stand, the favourites suggest a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump at this point, according to polls. But a long way still to go. The US Studies Centre has produced new research looking at public opinion in Japan, the US and Australia on a range of different matters. Among its findings, they found the number of Australians who believe war with China is likely has fallen from 58 down to 49%. Over half of the American respondents believe war is likely. That's just 38% in Japan. I looked more at this and other findings with Jared Mondschein. He's the Director of Research at the US Study Centre.
You can point to two things in particular on that. One, I think despite unprecedented investments in Australia's defense capabilities and the sort of AUKUS pathway forward being made clear and Chinese disinformation against that effort, Australians didn't buy it. I think Australians believe that deterrence is working. Secondly, I think Australians have trust in their country's handling of China. We actually polled as well whether in the US, Australia, and China, whether they think that their government is handling China, whether they approve of their government's handling of China. And we found that about a third of Australians actually agree, compared to less than 20% in Japan, for instance, and around the same in the US. So I think Australians, on one hand, think deterrence is working, that Australia standing up for its national interests is effective in doing the right thing and sort of lowering the likelihood of war. But secondly, I think they trust in their government's diplomacy.
This other number that I was reading through your report, it jumped out at me, and I just want to get your reflections on this, because Japan is really in the front line when it comes to aggression by China, and twice as many Japanese respondents, 40%, twice as many Japanese than Americans, say war with China is very unlikely for their country in the next decade. That is an interesting number, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, some may say that that's wishful thinking, but I think at the same time, I think Japan has in many ways shown how to manage China. Let's not forget, who was one of the first countries to really face Chinese economic coercion? It was the Japanese. And who was one of the first countries to find a way of stabilization in its relationship with China, despite unprecedented investments in its national security? It was the Japanese under Shinzo Abe. So at the same time that Shinzo Abe was revolutionizing his foreign policy, having a more active approach, really coining the term free and open Indo-Pacific, a term that then the United States and Australia have adopted themselves, Shinzo Abe was also expanding economic ties with China. So I think in many ways, Japan has shown how to walk and chew gum at the same time in its relationship with China. And on one hand, making sure that it stands up for its national interests and not compromising on those. On the other hand, trying to find economic gains where they can.
On the issue of AUKUS, there's a broad support you've found across the US, Australia and Japan for the AUKUS initiative. But when you drill into the numbers, there is a bit of concern there, I think, for Australian governments on the lack of awareness and lack of support among the younger cohort.
That's right. So broadly, all three publics, the US, Australian, and Japanese publics, are in favor of AUKUS far more than they are against it. So some 42% of Australians are saying that AUKUS makes Asia safer, and only 13% say that it makes Asia less safe. But then, as you said, if you sort of drill down into the numbers, it's a different story, because what we found is that a majority of 18 to 34-year-old Australians said they were unsure or didn't know whether AUKUS makes Asia safer. 35% said it does make Asia safer, and 13% said it didn't. But then when we asked more specifically, because maybe people don't know AUKUS, that term, but they know nuclear-powered submarines, that has more resonance, right? And we found that 33% of 18 to 34-year-old Australians said it's a good idea for Australia to have nuclear-powered submarines. 27% said it wasn't, so pretty close, only a 6 percentage point difference. But then 40% say they were unsure or didn't know. So, AUKUS is an unprecedentedly large defense investment that will last generations. And despite all of that, I don't see the young people really finding a lot of identity with it, finding commonality. They're really unsure. And while there might be slightly more approval than disapproval, I think there's a lot of work to do by the government in particular to really bring the younger Australians along for the ride of why AUKUS and why now.
And if it's going to last generations, absolutely. That seems a very important thing to do to bring that next generation along for the ride on this issue. Jared Mondschein from the US Studies Centre, great to get your insights and to read this report. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.